Hello, great golf learners, and welcome to another short session again. In this session, I'm going to be explaining major shareholding. And to do that, I am going to use the KZN prelim for the year 2023 together with the Eastern Cape prelim for the year 2024. Let's begin in the KZN prelim for the year 2023. And it reads on 3.2.5. The CEO, Stanley Foster, currently owns 46% of the issued shares after the repurchasing of shares on 31 October 2022. So there must be a repurchase of shares here. You can see that one here. Okay, so we have authorized share capital. Then the number of shares in issue on 1 September. 1 September is the beginning of the financial year. There was 2,050,000. And then shares were repurchased on the 31st of October. 260,000 shares were repurchased. So now the number of shares on 31 August, which is the end, let's see how many shares that will be then. So we would say the 2,050,000, the 2,050,000, then we subtract the 260,000, and then that will give us 1,790,000. Okay, so we get 1,790,000 shares at the end. Let's go back to the question. So it says he currently owns 46% of the issued shares after the repurchase. So it means of that 1,790,000, he owns 46% of that. The board of directors has decided to issue all the unissued shares. Okay? And then now calculate the minimum number of shares that Stanley must buy in April to gain control of the company. Let's do that. So here, remember, we are answering this question 3.2.5. So we are doing our 3.2.5, and we start with the first bullet where they want us to calculate the minimum number of shares that he must buy to gain control of the company. All right. So presently, he is owning 46% of these shares. So the shares that we have in issue at the end is 1,790,000. I showed you how to calculate that. You simply say your 2,050,000, which is the shares in issue at the beginning, minus the shares that we repurchased, which is your 260,000. Then you end up with 1,790,000. So of that 1,790,000, we are being told that he has 46% of this. Let's see how many shares that will be now. So of this, then we multiply by 46%. That means he is in possession of 823,400 shares. These are shares that he is in possession of. Remember, they said none of Stanley's shares were repurchased. When this repurchase took place, it did not affect the shares that belong to Stanley. So none of his shares were repurchased. Okay, so he will still have his 823,400. That is after the repurchase. Now, we are then told that the board of directors had decided to issue all the unissued shares. All the unissued shares. What that means is when we had the 3 million, which is the authorized, 3 million is the authorized, the maximum number of shares that the company is allowed to issue, the authorized share capital, which was 3 million here. The company then issued, the company issued. How many did they issue? They issued 2,050,000. Remember, they issued 2,050,000 there. It would then mean after they've issued that, they will remain with unissued. Unissued. So we want to know how many shares were unissued. So we would say the 3 million, which is the maximum, the authorized, then we subtract what was issued, which is the 2,050,000, which was issued, then would remain with unissued shares, which is 950,000. So 950,000 is the unissued shares. Now, when they repurchased shares, which is 260, these 260,000 shares that were repurchased will not affect our unissued shares. They will not affect the unissued shares. The unissued shares will still remain 950,000. I had some learners who are now taking the 950,000 and adding the 260. No, you don't do that. Once shares are repurchased, this 260,000, it was then retired. We cannot issue it further again. It is retired. So the only shares that we can still issue is the 950,000 shares. Now, out of that 950,000 shares that we can still issue, we are being told that they were then issued. They were then issued. Okay? So these were then issued. So it therefore means we will now say my 1,790,000, which was in issue at the end, plus the shares that we are now going to issue, which is the 950, plus the 950,000. How many shares now are going to be in issue? So it's the 950 plus the 1,790,000. And it will give you 2,740,000. So you end up now with 2,740,000. This is the number of shares that will now be in issue after the company has issued all the unissued shares. Someone is saying, but Mr. Simbi, why didn't you just take the 3 million, which is the authorized, and subtract the 260, which is the repurchase? Yes, indeed, you could have done that, and you still come back to your 2,740,000. But I had to explain what I explained up there so that you can have a clear understanding. So this would have been the shorter way of doing that. Now, of that 2,740,000, remember now, he wants to gain control. So we'll take the 2,740,000, and then we'll now say, if he's to gain control, remember there's two ways. He has to own 51% or 50% plus one share. For the sake of this class, I'm going to use 51%. Okay, so I'll say my 2,740,000, then I get 51% of that. That is going to give me 1,397,400. 1,397,400. Now, let's bring it into perspective. If he is to become a major shareholder, he has to have 1,397,400. But currently, he is having 823,400. That is what he's currently having. So if he is to move from the 823,400 to end up owning 1,397,400, how many shares must he buy? So we simply say the 1,397,400 minus the 823,400. And then it means he has to buy 574,000 shares. 574,000 shares. These are the number of shares that Stanley has to buy to become a majority shareholder. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next question, as I promised you. The next one is from the Eastern Cape prelim paper, Eastern Cape for the year 2024. Okay, let's see what they're saying in the Eastern Cape for the year 2024. Here is the question. And it says, okay, let's get a pen so that it becomes easy for us. There we go. It says, refer to information B. Calculate the number of shares that John Khan purchased from the 250,000 new shares on 1 February 2024 to retain his majority status. Okay, so here in the previous question, they were talking about a future plan, how many shares he has to buy to become a majority shareholder. But here they're telling us that he was a majority shareholder and he has retained his majority shareholding even when there were new shares that were issued. So they wanted to calculate the number of shares that he has purchased. Okay, let's come to the information. We are told that in the year 2023, Mr. Khan has 51%. 51% of the number of shares in issue. The number of shares in issue are 650,000. So it would mean that I take my 650,000 shares, which are in issue, and we know that Mr. Khan is holding 51% of that. How many shares is he having? So that would be 650,000 multiplied by 51%. So he currently has 331,500. He currently has 331,500 shares. This is what he currently holds. Now, 250,000 shares were then issued. Remember, this is the number of shares in issue. So, out of the 650,000, we have issued a further 250. So, we would then come and say, of the 650, we have added 250,000 more shares that are now in issue. Okay? And then in total, we are now going to say 650 plus the 250. Okay, let's just use our calculator. Here's the 650 plus the 250. That means in total, the number of shares that are outstanding or in issue is 900,000 shares. This is the total number of shares that are now in issue. And we are told now of this number of shares, he now owns 50.1%. He now owns 50.1%. So we are going to come and we're now going to say out of the 900,000, let's calculate the 50.1. All right, so let's get our calculator. Then we're now going to say the 900,000 multiplied by your 50.1%. Okay, percent. And then that is going to give us 450,900. That means if I take my 900,000 shares and I get 50.1%, it means he now has 450,900 shares. Okay? That is what it means. Because now remember, he holds 50.1%. That makes him retain his majority shareholding status. The question then is, from the shares that he was holding at the beginning, which is 331,500, and the shares that he holds now at the end, 450,900, how many shares did he add? So the difference is what we're looking for. So I'll simply say my 450,900 minus my 331,500. Okay, so I'll come here, then I'll say 450,900. Then I subtract my 331,500. And that will give me 119,400. So I'll end up with 119,400 shares. This is the number of shares that Mr. John has purchased. Learners, I'll see you again in the next class. Until next time, take care and enjoy studying.